Today's Bible passage is from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of the religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Good morning. Good morning. Let me just tuck myself in here. Well, if any of you are counting, it's just 3 weeks until Christmas. Are things starting to get busy for you? Yeah. Well, as we journey towards Christmas, I think today's lesson contains some very important insights into how to find joy this Christmas season, and really throughout life. In the lesson, 2 invitations are made to see Jesus. First, God invites the wise men through the appearance of a star, and they set out on a journey of discovery and joy. Second, God invites King Herod. And he does this through the words of the Magi, and as he learns from Scripture, the exact town where Jesus will be. And it's just 5 miles away. I mean, think about that. Jesus is just 5 miles away. And yet, Herod doesn't go a single step. And as far as we know, Herod never saw Jesus, even though he was right there. 2 invitations, opportunities to meet Jesus personally. But only one of those Christmas journeys is filled with joy. And so my question for you today is, what made the difference in these 2 life journeys? And what does it say about our own personal journeys these next 21 days and for the rest of our lives? You see, to me, if there is one defining characteristic of Herod's personal journey, it is his was a journey of someone who was always busy. Among his many projects, as you probably know, he was responsible for the remodeling and enlarging of the temple in Jerusalem. And at this point with this lesson, he had already spent 15 of his years helping to do that. But Herod had tons of other building projects. He had Masada, he had Herodium, he had Caesarea Maritima, which was a whole city, a port. on the Mediterranean Sea that he was building up. They were actually constructing a port where it didn't exist. So it wasn't a natural harbor, but it was artificial that they had to sit there and construct from basically nothing. He also rebuilt Jericho, not where the walls had fallen down, that was still in disrepair, but just I think a little bit south, he rebuilt Jericho. So this was a busy guy. And he also kept busy strengthening his position as king, going so far as to have one of his wives, listen carefully, one of his wives and her brother murdered, as well as 3 of his own sons. Not too many Father's Day cards went around that family. In fact, I think he made a statement once in his life. He said, "It's better to be a pig than to be one of my sons." And one of his sons, Antipater, Herod had killed just 5 days before Herod himself died. So on his deathbed. So he's like, kill Antipater, check. Die, check. And so we see that Herod takes the news of Jesus coming not as a possible source of joy, but as just another thing to add to his already full to-do list. Now he has something else to deal with, the Messiah, a possible threat. And the point I'm trying to make here is for Herod, the coming of the Messiah just means more work. And consequently, I don't see a lot of joy in Herod's opportunity to see Jesus. Now, what does that have to do with us? Well, although I don't want to liken any of us to King Herod, I still think that there might be some similarities between our Christmas journeys and Herod's. What about all the things we have to do around Christmas? Parties to get ready for, gifts yet to buy, houses to clean and decorate. To tell you the truth, hasn't Christmas in some ways become much like Herod's? In America, Christmas has become a holiday focused on lots of things to do. And we have a lot of things tugging for our time and our attention. And I think this can lead us to feeling like Herod probably did, which is maybe feeling stressed out, possibly even joyless. Well, what was so different about the Magi's Christmas journey? After all, they had things they were doing. I want you to focus in on what created the joy that is so evident in their journey. And to see, I first want to invite you to think when you were a young child. Can you think back that way? Are you there? All right. Christmas time as a young child. Why do kids often enjoy Christmas more than adults? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah, to me it's easy. Because kids look at it as simply a time to receive gifts. That's their main focus. At least that was mine. Maybe I was just selfish, but that was my focus. And so it's a time of joy. And wouldn't it be great for all of us if we could have that sense of joy? We'll now consider the adult magi, the wise men. When we think of the wise men, I think we often think of their long journey and the gifts that they gave, the work they did. But you see, my guess is if we were to interview them, we would probably be surprised at what they would say about their Christmas journey. They would likely have a totally different view of their journey. they would tell us how it was all about what they received that Christmas. And how from the very start, they were the invited guests. And I think they'd tell us of the special invitation God had given them, the star, how it took their breath away. And I think they would also definitely find time that they would tell us about the priceless gift that lay there for them at the end of their journey, their Savior, to be able to stare him in the face. You see, the Magi found joy that Christmas because they understood that their whole Christmas journey was not about all that had to be done. That was Herod's focus. But rather, for the Magi, it was all about the joy that comes from the gift they were receiving. In verse 10, it says, when they saw the star that would lead them to Jesus, they were filled with joy. And so I think the journeys are very different. This morning I want to share with you a true Christmas story that happened just 28 years ago. So in our lifetime, I think most of us, not all of us, just 28 years ago. And it's in an area that I think you guys have a lot of interest in, which is Eastern Europe and Russia. And I think if the Magi were here today, if they were sitting out here where you are, I think they might explain their Christmas joy with this story. And they would want it to give us perspective on our journey this Christmas season and really the rest of our lives. You see, in 1994, 2 Americans answered an invitation from the Russian Department of Education. And they were invited to teach morals and ethics based on biblical principles in the public schools there. And not only the public schools, but they were invited to teach at prisons, they were invited to teach at businesses, the fire and police departments, and a large orphanage. And about 100 boys and girls who had been abandoned and abused and left in the care of a government-run program were in that orphanage. And I want these Christians to tell their story in their own words. So from now on, it's them speaking. They said it was nearly the holiday season, 1994. Time for our orphans to hear for the first time the traditional story of Mary and Joseph arriving in Bethlehem. And finding no room in the inn, the couple went to a stable where the baby Jesus was born, placed in a manger. And they write, throughout the story, the children and orphanage staff sat in amazement as they listened. And some sat on the edges of their stools trying to grasp every word. And he says, completing the story, we gave the children 3 small pieces of cardboard to make a crude manger. Each child was given a small paper square cut from yellow napkins that I had brought with me, because no colored paper was available in the entire city. And he says, following the instructions, the children tore the paper and carefully laid the strips in the manger for straw. He said small squares of flannel cut from a worn-out nightgown an American lady threw away as she left Russia were used for the baby's blankets. And a doll-like baby was cut from tan felt that we had brought from the United States. It says the orphans were busy assembling their mangers as I walked among them to see if they needed any help. And all went well until I got to one table where little Misha sat. He looked to be about 6 years old, and he had finished his project. As I looked at the little boy's manger, I was startled to see not one, but two babies in the manger. And so I called for the translator to ask the lad why there were two babies in the manger. Crossing his arms in front of him and looking at this completed manger scene, the child began to repeat the story very seriously. And he says, for such a young child who had only heard the Christmas story once, he related the happenings very accurately. Until he came to the part where Mary put the baby Jesus in the manger. Then Misha started to ad lib. And he made up his own ending to the story. As he said, and when Maria laid the baby in the manger, Jesus looked at me and asked me if I had a place to stay. I told him I have no mama and I have no papa, so I don't have any place to stay. Then Jesus told me I could stay with him. But I told him I couldn't, because I didn't have a gift to give him like everybody else did. But I wanted to stay with Jesus so much, so I thought about what I had that maybe I could use for a gift. I thought maybe if I keep him warm, that would be a good gift. And so I asked Jesus, if I keep you warm, will that be a good enough gift? And Jesus told me, if you keep me warm, that will be the best gift anybody ever gave me. And so I got in the manger. And then Jesus looked at me, and he told me that I could stay with him for always. The American telling the story says, as little Misha finished his story, his eyes brimmed full of tears that splashed on his cheeks. And putting his hand over his face, his head dropped to the table and his shoulders shook as he sobbed. And he ends by saying, the little orphan had found someone who would never abandon him, nor abuse him. Someone who would stay with him for always. You see, from the perspective of the wise men, their gift giving was a lot like the story of that boy in the orphanage. I mean, one might wrongly assume that that story was about the gift the boy gave, the offer to keep Jesus warm, or what the wise men gave, what they did. But I think if you were to ask that boy or the wise men, they would probably tell you the story was about the gift they were given, of a God who wants to be with us for always. You see, it was about what they received. And that's why the Christmas story, why Jesus meant so much to them. And I hope during the next 21 days, that you experience the Christmas journey the way that the wise men and Misha did. Not like Herod's joyless journey, as a time of endless to-dos and tiresome responsibilities, but rather just the opposite. As a time for you to hold out your hands like a little child on Christmas and receive the ultimate gift. And to know the great joy of experiencing that gift. And knowing it is really yours. In a very personal way. And so that's what we're going to do the next couple of weeks of Advent, is we're going to look into that manger scene, we're going to look at that baby's face, and we're going to get to know him a little bit better. And I'd like to help you to see him in a very personal way.